Welcome to History Captured. We document what history tried to erase. This letter was never meant to survive. German field censors destroyed millions like it. Soldiers were forbidden to describe fear, doubt, or despair. But some still wrote the truth, knowing the paper would be burned and the words erased. Veterans later said these moments were the worst. Not the fighting, the waiting. Dawn meant orders, and orders meant death for someone. No one knew who it would be. Soldiers learned quickly that silence was dangerous. Silence meant listening, and listening gave the mind too much time to imagine what was coming. After combat, many felt nothing, not victory, not relief. Only the strange guilt of being alive when others were not. For some, capture was not defeat, it was survival. The war, at least for them, was finally over. Many prisoners later said this moment stayed with them forever. Kindness from an enemy broke everything they had been taught to believe. These letters were different. No slogans, no lies. Just the hope of seeing home again. For many, survival did not bring peace. The war followed them home. Decades later, some finally spoke. Not about glory, but about fear they never escaped. This was the truth many never admitted. War did not create heroes. It only left scars. By 1944, Germany was sending boys to the front. Some had never shaved. Many had never fired a rifle before combat. Survivors later admitted the fear on these faces haunted them more than any battlefield. Many soldiers hated being photographed, not because they feared bullets, but because a camera could capture what they tried to hide: doubt, fear, and regret. Orders were often delivered without explanation. Soldiers learned not to ask questions. Questions made survival less likely. Not all soldiers were young. Some had already lived full lives before the war took everything else away. Many soldiers survived explosions, but never fully returned from them. For many, surrender was not shame. It was the first moment of safety in years. Silence in captivity felt different. It was not fear. It was exhaustion, finally allowed to exist. Many wrote the same sentence first. I am alive. Nothing else mattered. Home no longer felt familiar. The war had changed everything, especially them. Only decades later did some speak freely. Not to justify, but to finally be honest. In the final months of the war, some soldiers simply stopped firing. Not out of mercy, but because their minds refused to continue. Records show several units quietly reported weapon malfunctions. The truth was never written down. Night watch broke more soldiers than combat. Alone, listening, imagining footsteps that never came. Many later said the darkness followed them for life. Photos like this were forbidden. Any sign of empathy towards civilians was considered weakness. Many such images were destroyed before the war even ended. Field medics saw everything and carried it longer than anyone else. Many never returned to medical practice, unable to touch another patient. Late war orders often made no sense. Soldiers obeyed not out of belief, but because disobedience was still more dangerous. When the war officially ended, many felt nothing. No joy, just emptiness, and the question of what came next. The journey home was silent. No one knew what awaited them, or whether they were still welcome. Many survivors never truly slept again. Nightmares replaced memory. Silence replaced conversation. Many interviews ended early, not because of censorship, but because memory became unbearable. This was the part of the war few spoke about. Not the battles, but what remained when everything else was gone. Marches like these lasted for days. Hunger, blisters, exhaustion. Many soldiers later said the road itself felt endless, as if it was designed to erase them long before any battle. Silence became common, not because there was nothing to say, but because words no longer helped. Winter broke discipline faster than any enemy. Weapons froze, fingers froze, morale followed. Many soldiers remembered watching the war from behind glass, not fighting, waiting for orders that might never come. Hot food was rare. When it appeared, men remembered it for decades. Not for taste, but for the brief illusion of normal life. Most war was maintenance, cleaning, repairing, waiting. The fighting was only a fraction of the experience. Moments like this were rare, and often followed by guilt, as if happiness itself was forbidden. Many personal records were abandoned. Names, numbers, orders, left behind as men retreated faster than paperwork. Retreats were rarely recorded in reports, but they were remembered, as the moment hope finally ran out. This was how many remembered the end. Not victory, not defeat, just silence. This was never shown in propaganda. Soldiers crying openly, not from pain, but from collapse. Diaries describe these moments as the point where the war finally broke them. Psychologists later called this combat dissociation. Soldiers described feeling empty, as if the person behind the eyes was already gone. Discipline was enforced, even as defeat became inevitable. Executions for cowardice continued until the final weeks. Fear of command often outweighed fear of the enemy. Many wounded begged not to be sent back. Some injured themselves deliberately. Military records quietly noted these as accidents. Many soldiers later admitted this was the moment guilt set in. Not during battle, but while walking through what was left behind. At first, bodies shocked them. Later, they became landmarks. That change terrified survivors more than the deaths themselves. Many admitted they no longer knew why they were shooting. Orders blurred, meaning disappeared. Leaving a weapon behind was unthinkable early in the war. By 1945, it happened everywhere. For many, capture meant survival. Some later said it was the first moment they felt human again. This was the part of the war few admitted. Not defeat, not victory, just what remained after everything else was gone. By 1943, frontline doctors noticed a pattern they never discussed openly. Wounds to the leg, to the foot, always non-fatal. A bullet like this meant evacuation, not punishment. Many survived the war because of injuries no one asked questions about. Even as defeat became inevitable, discipline did not loosen. Soldiers were still executed for refusal, hesitation, or retreat. Official notices said they fell in combat. The truth stayed with those who watched. Front doctors used careful language. Temporary exhaustion. Nervous episode. In reality, these men could no longer speak, move, or obey. Most were sent back within days. Letters describing fear or doubt were never delivered. Entire batches were burned before leaving the front. Families received silence and learned to live with it. Some medics worked for days without sleep. When they collapsed, another took their place. Their reports praised endurance, not survival. Some soldiers deliberately sought capture. It was safer than retreat, and far safer than continuing to obey. Entire units vanished during retreats. Some were destroyed. Others simply walked away, and were never recorded again. Stimulants were widely issued to keep men awake and fighting. Overdoses were quietly recorded as natural causes. The numbers were never discussed. Thousands were listed as missing. Their bodies were never found. Their stories ended without witnesses. Only after the war did some speak honestly, not in interviews but in private when no one was listening. In October 1941, the village of Katsun still existed. People lived here. Children slept in these houses. This photograph was taken shortly before the village was erased. No one in the frame knew what orders had already been issued. On October 25, 1941, soldiers of the 1st Battalion, 156th Artillery Regiment, entered Katsun. They were not SS units. They were regular Wehrmacht artillerymen. That fact would later shock investigators, far more than the crime itself. Witnesses later testified that the villagers were gathered without resistance. There was no battle, no warning. The decision to kill had already been made before the first soldier entered the street. The executions were carried out methodically. Houses were set on fire. Women, elderly people, and children were shot in groups. More than 300 civilians were killed that day. In German reports, the massacre was described in one line: anti-partisan operation completed, no losses. Nothing else was recorded. Katsun disappeared from the maps, but not from history. This photograph was never meant to be seen by civilians. It shows Soviet soldiers positioned behind their own retreating troops. In 1941, special blocking units operated at the rear of the Red Army. Their task was not to fight the enemy, but to stop retreat. Soldiers who stepped back without orders could be arrested or executed on the spot. In official reports, these deaths were recorded as combat losses. Families were never told where or how their sons really died. This photograph shows a wounded German soldier at a field aid station. Officially, such injuries were described as accidents or enemy fire. In reality, thousands of soldiers deliberately shot themselves in the leg or hand. It was one of the few ways to escape the front alive. Military doctors were ordered to report these wounds as combat injuries. Executions for self-inflicted wounds were rare, not because they didn't happen, but because too many soldiers were doing it. This photograph was taken years after World War II officially ended. It shows a Japanese soldier hiding in the jungle. He did not know the war was over, or refused to believe it. Orders received in the 1940s were followed decades later. Some of these soldiers continued to kill, convinced the enemy was still everywhere. For them, the war never ended. It simply faded into isolation and silence. This photograph shows the aftermath of a military incident that never appeared in newspapers. During the war, several British naval and transport disasters were deliberately concealed. The reason was simple. Public knowledge could expose weaknesses to the enemy. Families were informed that their relatives were missing or lost at sea. In some cases, the real cause of death remained classified for decades. For those left behind, the war ended without answers. This photograph was taken during a military test, not a battle. American soldiers were used in experiments involving chemical agents and radiation exposure. They were told it was safe, or told nothing at all. Many participants signed documents without understanding the risks. Medical records were sealed, and the experiments denied for years. Only decades later did survivors learn what had actually been done to them. This photograph does not show forced cooperation. It shows civilians assisting occupying forces voluntarily. In occupied France, collaboration was not always imposed. Some cooperated for money, protection, or personal advantage. After liberation, many of these actions were quietly forgotten. Official memory preferred resistance over uncomfortable truth. This photograph captures Italian soldiers after their command collapsed. Orders stopped arriving. Supplies stopped coming. Many units were left without leadership or clear allegiance. Some surrendered. Others simply waited. Official histories later described these moments as chaos. For the soldiers in the photograph, it felt like abandonment. This photograph shows a handwritten order with no registration number. Such orders existed, but officially they did not. In 1942, some executions and arrests were carried out on verbal or unsigned instructions. Nothing could be traced. No appeal was possible. After the war, these actions left no paper trail, and without documents, they officially never happened. This photograph was taken shortly before a sentence was carried out. The soldier separated from the group was not accused of desertion. He was accused of exhaustion. Medical officers reported him as fit for duty, and refusal to stand up was recorded as insubordination. The execution followed standard procedure. In reports, the reason was shortened to one word: discipline. This photograph shows Japanese soldiers destroying documents. As defeat became inevitable, orders were given to erase evidence. Unit records, interrogation notes, execution lists burned. The goal was not secrecy during the war, but silence after it. Many crimes were never investigated because the proof no longer existed. This photograph shows a woman holding an identification tag. There is no body to identify. During the war, families were sometimes handed personal items without explanations. No location, no date, no grave. Officially, this counted as notification. Unofficially, It marked the moment when questions were no longer allowed. This photograph shows an office where names disappeared. Soldiers and civilians were recorded here as detained. No charges, no court. Many were later marked simply as missing. Families received no death notice because no death was officially registered. For the state, these people did not die. They stopped existing. This photograph was taken after the war. The man in the frame served on the Eastern Front. There is no uniform, no record of his actions. After 1945, thousands of former soldiers returned to ordinary life without investigation. Some had participated in executions. Others had given orders. History did not ask them questions, and many answers were never demanded. This photograph documents a test, not a battle. Soldiers were told the equipment was being evaluated. They were not told what they were exposed to. Chemical agents were released in controlled conditions. Medical files were sealed. For decades, participants were denied that any experiment had taken place. The truth surfaced only when documents were declassified. This photograph captures a moment before surrender became inevitable. Soldiers were instructed that capture was dishonor. Some were ordered to fight until death. Others were told to disappear into terrain and wait. Years later, some were still following those instructions. The war ended on paper, but not in their minds. This photograph shows the place, not the act. In some units, executions were carried out as demonstrations. The purpose was instruction, not punishment. Soldiers were forced to watch so they would understand the consequences of hesitation. Reports describe these events as disciplinary measures. No names were recorded. The lesson was meant to be remembered, not documented. This photograph was taken after a successful engagement. There are no prisoners in the frame. In several operations, Allied units received unofficial instructions to take none. These orders were never written down. Later reports simply stated, "Enemy eliminated." Investigations were avoided to preserve morale and reputation. This photograph shows a road where a unit vanished. No battle was recorded here. No enemy contact was reported. An entire platoon was later listed as missing. Internal documents suggested execution for insubordination. Official history kept the explanation deliberately vague. This photograph was taken after surrender. Soldiers were instructed not to discuss what they had done or seen. Silence was presented as loyalty. Many obeyed for the rest of their lives. Families heard fragments, never full stories. Some memories died with those who carried them. This photograph shows a unit that had been cut off for weeks. Supply lines failed. Evacuation was impossible. Official reports listed the losses as from exposure in combat. Internal investigations later recorded cases of cannibalism. These files were sealed immediately. The men who survived were transferred quietly. The men who did not were never mentioned again. This photograph was taken after an operation, not during it. The soldiers present were not enemies. They were witnesses. After mass shootings, selected personnel were reassigned or eliminated. The purpose was simple: remove those who knew too much. No records were kept. Silence was considered a successful outcome. This photograph shows a place that did not officially exist. Temporary detention rooms were established by local garrisons. Prisoners were held without registration, interrogation logs, or release dates. Many never left. After surrender, these locations were dismantled overnight. Without records, no charges could be filed. The buildings returned to silence. This photograph shows a facility absent from official maps. Such compounds were used to hold individuals deemed problematic. Soldiers, prisoners, civilians. Categories overlapped. Detention was justified as temporary. Many detainees were later reassigned under new identities. Others were never officially released. The files remained classified long after the war. This photograph shows the remains of a field satchel. Inside were orders that never reached their destination. During encirclements, paper became a liability. Soldiers destroyed documents to avoid capture, sometimes by burning them, sometimes by swallowing them. In several recorded cases, starvation followed. Reports later described these deaths as combat losses. The documents disappeared. The reasons went with them. This photograph shows a medical station after it was cleared. Doctors and orderlies treated not only wounds, but witnesses. After certain operations, medical staff were transferred abruptly. Some never appeared in personnel lists again. Official explanations cited reassignment. No further records followed. Silence was considered a medical necessity. This photograph shows a ration distribution that was not meant to be recorded. On isolated islands, supplies ran out completely. Command issued instructions to use available resources. Survivors later testified that human remains were included. These testimonies were classified. The war ended before investigations began. The files were closed without conclusions. This photograph shows an interrogation room without records. Such rooms were used by intelligence services for unofficial questioning. Detainees were held temporarily, on paper. In reality, some never left. No arrest forms were filed. No deaths were recorded. The room existed only while it was needed. This photograph was taken after the war officially ended. The men in the frame were returning from the front, under escort. Some units were subjected to post-war screening for unreliability. Interrogations followed. A number of veterans were detained, reassigned, or disappeared. Officially, this was called verification. Unofficially, it was a final purge of inconvenient witnesses. This photograph shows a transfer that left no paperwork. In the final months of the war, unofficial exchanges took place. Specialists, informants, and officers were handed over quietly. The goal was not justice but information. Names were altered, files were split. Many of those transferred vanished into new identities. Official records deny these exchanges ever occurred. This photograph shows a medical facility absent from official lists. Such hospitals treated personnel involved in classified operations. Patients were isolated. Records were minimal. When defeat became imminent, evacuation was selective. Some facilities were dismantled overnight. The wounded left behind were never officially admitted. Without records, no deaths could be counted. This photograph shows files prepared for archiving and removal. At the end of the war, selected reports were withdrawn. Some concerned civilian casualties. Others documented unofficial operations. The files were reclassified or destroyed. Decades later, historians encountered gaps that could not be explained. The absence itself became the evidence. This photograph shows a facility that was never officially classified as a camp. Children were held here after village clearances. No records listed their names or ages. Transfers happened at night. Some were relocated, others disappeared. After the war, the site was dismantled. Without documents, there were no missing persons to report. This photograph shows a civilian interpreter working with a military unit. Interpreters heard everything: orders, confessions, names. When operations ended, many were reassigned temporarily. Some were later detained. Official reasons varied. Unofficially, they knew too much. Their files end abruptly. This photograph shows men who returned from isolated fronts. They were questioned briefly, then released. Families noticed changes: silence, insomnia, avoidance. Some never spoke again. Years later, a number of these veterans died by suicide. No connection was officially established. The war followed them home. This photograph shows where many stories ended. Boxes were sealed. Files were closed. Some documents were classified indefinitely. Others were never archived at all. What remains today is not a complete history, but a carefully managed silence. And silence, too, is a form of record.